Airport Zoning Commission for February 16th, 2022 are called to order concurrently at 6:10 p.m. Pursuant to Executive Order N25-20 and N-29-20. Members of the Planning Commission and staff are participating in this meeting via video link, Zoom and or teleconference. This is not an in-person meeting. Members of the public may observe this meeting on the City of Hawthorne website or on YouTube. Pledge of Allegiance, if I can call on Commissioner Caraveo to lead us on the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Okay, please begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, can we have the roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
Present.
Commissioner Caraveo.
Present.
Commissioner Richard.
Present.
And let the record reflect that Chairperson Smith and Vice Chairperson Al-Shanabli are not present.
Thank you. Okay, this is the time for oral communication. Because this meeting is not an in-person meeting, members of the public who wish to participate in the meeting were asked to participate by calling or emailing the Planning Department no later than 5:30 p.m. today, noting the item on which the member wants to speak. This information was provided on the agenda posted in compliance with the Brown Act on Thursday, February 10th, 2022. At this time, if there were any messages left for oral communication, staff will either read messages on behalf of those individuals who wished to provide written comments for oral communication, or invite members of the public who wish to provide oral comments to speak through the Zoom application. Remarks, whether written or oral, are still limited to 3 minutes in duration. Staff, is there any communication?
We received no email communications, and I was not informed of any voicemail messages. So if we'll just wait for a little bit, if anyone wants to log in, and give them a couple of minutes to catch up, because this is delayed in its broadcast. And if nobody comes on, then we can move on.
Okay, just let us know when.
Okay, I see nobody has joined us, so I believe we can move on now.
Okay, thank you. Planning Commission and Airport Zoning Commission consent calendar. Are there is no items, correct?
That is correct, no items.
Okay. Next section is recess. We'll recess the Airport Zoning Commission, Planning Commission consent calendar. Item number 1, approval of Planning Commission and Airport Zoning Commission minutes for the regular meeting of December 15th, 2021. Can I have a motion to approve?
Would that work if just 2 of us were there?
Yeah, minutes can be approved with the majority of the members that are present, provided that we were at the meeting, I guess.
Okay, I'll motion to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Okay. Commissioner Caraveo?
Yes.
Commissioner Richard?
Yes.
And Commissioner Ortiz?
Yes.
Okay, so those minutes are approved on a unanimous 3-0 vote.
Okay. Next item, approval of Planning Commission, Airport Zoning Commission Minutes for the regular meeting of January 19th, 2029. Can I have a motion for approval?
I'll motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Carvalho,
Yes.
Commissioner Richard,
Yes.
and Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
All right, again, the minutes are approved unanimously, 3-0.
Thank you.
All right,
Next section, continue public hearings. City of Hawthorne, sixth cycle housing element final draft, safety element final draft, environmental justice element final draft, and the initial study and negative declaration for these elements.
you can keep reading.
Okay. Negative declaration. Now is the time and place to open the public hearing to consider the negative declaration, housing element, safety element, and environmental justice element. Director McLean, who will present the staff report.
We're going to have one presentation or one combination of presentations for all of these instead of taking them separately, because your action tonight will be a recommendation to the City Council. So I've also combined that recommendation into one Planning Commission resolution just to keep everything moving rather fast tonight, I hope. But we have our consultant who has worked on this with us throughout the last several, well, I guess it's been more than a year, but I wasn't here all that time. Perry Banner with De Novo Planning Group, and he will be making the presentation. Go ahead, Perry.
Great, thank you, Greg. Members of the commission, Commissioner Ortiz, thank you for stepping up. Commissioner Carvalho, great to see you again. We run into each other periodically. Commissioner Richard, good evening. As Greg mentioned, this is a project that has been going on for a little over a year. And what I think I'd like to do tonight is I actually have two PowerPoints, one that's focused on the housing element, the other that's focused on the safety element and new environmental justice element. I'm going to move through those kind of as efficiently as possible. I thought that maybe what we would do is at the end of the presentation for the housing element, if the commission had any burning questions, you can ask then, and then we'll move on to the safety and the environmental justice element. I know that there was a lot of material in your agenda with regard to these items. So I want to make sure that you have ample opportunities for questions. So I think that I have the ability to share my screen. I'm just going to launch right into the first PowerPoint.
Sounds good, thank you.
Great, and hopefully everyone can see the housing element PowerPoint that you have in front of us. And again, so this project has been, we got started on this project back in December of 2020 is when we had our first kickoff meeting. So it's been a long time in the making. Tonight, what I'd like to present to you, of course, is the update to the housing element for what we'll call the sixth cycle housing element planning period, an update to the safety elements, and then the preparation and presentation of the new environmental justice elements. So this project and its timeline was largely driven by the preparation of the housing elements, and we're in what we would call phase 4 of the project right now, which is the public hearings before the Planning Commission and next to the City Council. After we get through these public hearings and adoption, we'll send the housing elements back to the Department of Housing and Community Development for certification by the state. So this project, when you undertake something that's this big, there's we want to make sure that we reach out to the public and get input from the public. So there were a number of opportunities for public involvement along the course of the project. We did a virtual workshop back in April of 2021, had a couple of council study sessions. For the environmental justice element, we had a focus group meeting. The draft document was available for public review through November. And then we had a community open house in November as well. So to provide the commission with a little bit of background on what a housing element is, and I'm sure you know some of these things already, but it's essentially the city's plan for how it will address housing needs over a particular planning period. In this case, the planning period will be 2021 through 2029. And the housing element identifies goals, programs, and action items that really lays out the strategy for providing housing over the course of that period. As I mentioned, what we'll do is we'll submit this document after these hearings to the Department of Housing and Community Development for state certification. And what this housing element needs to do, it needs to demonstrate that there's adequate land to meet the housing needs of all residents in the city. It needs to have programs to facilitate affordable housing development. It needs to mitigate government constraints on housing development, and it needs to promote equal access to housing. I already described kind of the overall project, what it entails, so I'll just move through this slide and get right into what the housing element, how it's sort of organized, the document that you had in the agenda packet. So really there's two parts to this housing element plus the appendices. Part one is kind of the housing plan that lays out all the programs that will be implemented over this 8-year planning period to meet the needs, the housing needs in the city. And part two is all the background work that went to prepare that housing plan. We did a needs assessment. We looked at the constraints to housing development in the city, assessed the resources that were available, and then did an assessment of fair housing. And I'll discuss that fair housing assessment a little further in a bit. So I already said that the housing plan, essentially, it's that strategy for that next 8-year period. It tackles those issues that were identified when we did that housing needs assessment, and lays out all the goals, policies, and programs that will be part of the city's housing strategy. And broadly speaking, the goals that we've identified in the housing element, goal 1 is to provide a broad range of housing types and opportunities. Goal 2 is to provide housing opportunities for lower and moderate income households. Goal 3 is to preserve and maintain the existing housing stock. Goal 4 is to remove governmental and non-governmental constraints where feasible. And goal 5 is to promote equal housing opportunities. So the housing plan includes 23 programs that will be implemented, or to be implemented over that 8-year period. And the 6 topical areas are very similar to the goals that I just mentioned, so we won't discuss those. The background report, like I said, this is all the analysis that we did to arrive at our housing plan. We looked at the housing needs of everyone, all residents in the city, not just owners of households, but also renters and people with special housing needs. The background report also includes all the housing resources that are available to the city and describes how the city is going to meet its regional housing needs allocation. And finally, we do this fair housing analysis. And to talk a little bit more about what fair housing is all about, and rather than reading that kind of textbook definition, fair housing is really about ensuring that there's no segregation that's going on in the city, that everyone has an equal opportunity to live where they wish to live. And so when we do this analysis, we look at patterns of segregation and integration, and we try to make sure that we're removing, through these programs, any barriers that might be in place for anyone with special housing needs or anyone in the city in particular. For those that have heard this acronym before, RHNA, I'll just give you a quick little background on what this is all about. This regional housing needs allocation is a number that comes out from the state, comes down from the state originally, and it is it's a number that is assigned to every jurisdiction in California. Not the same number, that is. The state and the regional government, the Southern California Association of Governments, determines what each jurisdiction's fair housing need is. And in the case of Hawthorne, the arena that it was assigned was an arena of 1,734 units. What this means is that the city, through its housing elements and over the course of this planning period, needs to ensure that there's housing available to accommodate this number, this 1,734 units. And then of course, the regional housing needs allocation is broken down not just to above moderate income households, but also it's broken down into very low, low, and moderate income households. So we need to make sure that there's housing that's available for all these households in these individual income categories over the course of the planning period. So I'm going to elaborate on how it is that we do that with this housing element. And as I mentioned, what the city needs to do through its housing element is demonstrate that there's land use policies and zoning that is in place to sufficiently meet that RHNA. But what the RHNA isn't, and what the housing element doesn't need to do, nor does the city need to do this is not an obligation to construct that housing over that planning period. That is left to the free market. We just need to make sure that there's land use policies and zoning in place to accommodate that. So we're sort of setting the table for development to occur in the city. So each city is going to approach its RHNA and its housing needs differently. Hawthorne, like other cities in the South Bay area, is a built-out city, so we have to approach this differently than, say, a city that's out in the Inland Empire. So what Hawthorne will do, or what we're proposing to do, in order to meet its RHNA, is first we're allowed to take credit for all these projects that might be currently under construction, or maybe they're constructed but haven't yet received their certificates of occupancy. So we can take those projects as credits. We'll also look at projects that are in the pipeline, something that an application perhaps that's in the planning department right now and that the planning commission may consider over the next few months. And from there, we look at potential sites, vacant sites and underutilized sites. And then we determine, is there enough capacity? Can we meet our RHNA at this point? So as I mentioned, we start with the RHNA, that 1,700 number. And we look at the things that we can take as credit, which are the units that are under construction. And in this case, there are 330 units that are either being constructed, may have just completed construction. We look at the projects that are in the pipeline as well. These are projects that are maybe currently being reviewed by planning. We're also allowed to project out accessory dwelling units over the course of the 8-year period. And that leaves us with a remaining RHNA. And the remaining RHNA, once we look at all these things, is 630 units that are left to accommodate. So we need to have a plan for accommodating those 630 units. And so we have a 4-part plan in which to do that. One is to look at all the vacant and underutilized sites in the city. And as a resident of Hawthorne, you're well aware that there isn't many vacant sites in the city. So we have to explore other avenues. We're proposing to do a small increase in the permitted density in the downtown Hawthorne specific plan mixed-use district. We're proposing a new housing overlay for some sites in the city. And we're also proposing to rezone a section of the city in the southeast corner of the city. These properties that are zoned M1, proposing to rezone those to R3. And then when we look at sites, this particular housing element cycle is very different from housing element cycles in the past. Different in the sense that the State Department of Housing and Community Development is taking a very close look at the sites that we're selecting, ensuring that these sites have the potential to redevelop or to develop over the course of the 8-year planning period. So when we were selecting sites, we were looking at, we wanted to understand what their existing use was, whether there was available infrastructure, what the size of the site was, if we're assembling sites, what are the ownership patterns. these are all factors that we took into consideration when we were selecting sites for this particular housing element. So as I said, that first part of that program, or that first part of that 4-part plan, was to look at the vacant and underutilized residential and mixed-use sites currently available in the city that we wouldn't have to do anything with. We wouldn't have to rezone these sites. They're just available right now. And what we found is that they have a capacity for about 164 units across all income groups. So that gets us a little into the remaining RHNA, but of course not all the way. And the opportunity sites that we looked at, it might be a residentially zoned site that had a single residential unit on it that could be redeveloped and have higher density. It could be a commercially zoned property that could be redeveloped for mixed use. So these are the types of projects that we looked at under that category. The second part of that plan was to look at increasing the density of the downtown Hawthorne specific plan, in particular in the mixed use district, which is the area that's in orange here. To the left is north. The Hawthorne Mall is included as one of the sites in the downtown Hawthorne specific plan. The thing with the downtown Hawthorne specific plan is that although it allows mixed use development, it actually relies on the underlying zoning for its regulations. And in this case, it relies on the CM zone, which allows for a maximum density of 24 dwelling units per acre. With HCD, that's the Department of Housing and Community Development, they want to see sites that can accommodate at least 30 dwelling units to the acre in order to count those sites towards the lower income categories in that RHNA number. So the problem that we have right now is that although we might identify sites in the mixed use zone or in the mixed use district of the downtown Hawthorne specific plan, we would not actually be able to count those sites to meeting our lower income RHNA. So part 2 of this plan, as I said, is to make that small little increase in density to go from 24 dwelling units per acre to 30 dwelling units per acre. And what that does is it allows us to potentially have the capacity for an additional 807 units that we could then use across all income categories, not just above moderate income, but also towards the lower income categories. So with those 2 parts, vacant and underutilized sites that we don't need to do anything with, a little tweak to the downtown Hawthorne specific plan, we still have a little bit of a shortfall. And so what we needed to do was to look at other avenues for meeting that RHNA. And the other 2 avenues that we are proposing is to do a housing overlay and to do the rezoning of some sites in the southeast corner of the city. So first, with regard to the housing overlay, how a housing overlay works is that it creates a special zoning district that's placed on top of an existing base zone. So someone that owned that property, they would be able to develop a site based on the underlying zoning, or they could also develop the site for residential uses. So we're proposing a certain amount of sites to fall within this housing overlay. And what you'll see shortly, I'm going to show you a map of opportunity sites, but we looked at, for this particular category, we looked at sites mostly that were along major transportation corridors. We're looking at, for the most part, commercial properties, and you'll see shortly where those sites get distributed throughout the city. And finally, the 4th part of this program is to rezone certain properties in the city as from M1 to R3. And this is why we're doing this. There's a section of government code that requires the city, it requires that 50% of what we're going to call the shortfall lower income sites, 50% of those sites need to be accommodated or 50% of those units need to be accommodated on sites that are designated for residential use only. So what this means is that those housing overlay sites that I just described, where you could develop as a residential use, but you could also develop the underlying use, which may be commercial, those sites could not be counted towards meeting this requirement. And hence why we had to rezone, or why we're proposing to rezone. And once we do this rezoning from M1 to R3, we will have these sites that will be designated exclusively for residential uses. So not only will we end up meeting the RHNA, we'll also end up meeting this section of government code. And through the housing overlay and the rezoning of sites, we'll have capacity for another 712 units. So quickly I just want to explain this chart here. We started off with a RHNA, or a remaining RHNA, of 1,374 units. We took out the proposed projects. We took out ADUs. We now have those sites that are vacant and underutilized that we don't need to do anything with. We've made the adjustment to the downtown Hawthorne specific plan to allow for extra density. We have the housing overlay sites, and we have the rezoned M1 to R3 sites. And that gives us a total capacity of potentially 2,427 units in the city, which is actually a surplus, where we have more. We're demonstrating that there are more sites than is required per our RHNA. So we're in a good spot. We have having a surplus in our housing element is a positive thing, because we're not sure that HCD will accept all of our sites. So going in with this surplus is good for the city. And this map shows the housing opportunity sites. You can see that they're distributed throughout the city. Just a quick explanation: the sites that are in red are the sites that are currently vacant, sites that we didn't have to do anything with in terms of rezoning, but there's not that many, as you can see. The green sites are sites that are within the downtown Hawthorne specific plan, primarily along Hawthorne Boulevard. The yellow is the housing overlay, again, distributed throughout the city, but mostly on these major thoroughfares. And finally, the rezoning, which would take place in the southeast corner of the city, rezoning these properties from M1 to R3. And to give you an example of some of these opportunity sites, you can see here, this is actually the Hawthorne Nursery. And in this case, we have a developer that's actually expressed interest in redeveloping this site. So this is a prime site for redevelopment. Another actual site in the city, a vacant site in an industrial zone. And with that, I'm going to end the first part, or the first presentation on the housing element. Before I move on to the safety and environmental justice element, does the commission have any questions that you would like to ask? Seeing none, I'm just going to move on.
Oh, yeah, I had a question.
Oh, sorry, Jason.
So for the 24 units per acre, they don't take into account like density bonuses.
They do not. So
Okay.
the Department of Housing and Community, although, you know, some of those projects, of course, an applicant may come in and say that they want to do in excess of 24 units per acre by way of a density bonus. When HCD is reviewing this document, they do not take that into consideration. What we need to show is that the underlying zoning would permit at least 30 dwelling units per acre in order to use those sites towards our lower income numbers. We could use, and that being said, we could use those sites towards the moderate and above moderate income, but where the city is mostly falling short is on the lower income sites, the sites that are in the very low income category and the sites that are in the low income category. that's the we've got a shortfall of about 400 units in those two categories right there.
Okay. Do you know if the city, if we have like our own density bonus outside of the state requirements?
I think that if I recall from the assessment, the city's density bonus meets state guidelines and doesn't exceed them. But I think Greg might
No, that's
might
correct.
jump in. Yeah,
Our density bonus was patterned on the state guidelines. I think it's a little bit outdated, and it probably needs to be brought up to the current standards. But if that's the case, then we would follow the state standards.
Okay. And then do they also take into account like with the new state changes for like the lot splits? Would that go into consideration of the number of housing units?
You mean the SB9?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
and they don't. I know where you're going with this, Commissioner, but there, and the answer is no. I'm trying to give you a better explanation as to why that is, but there's I know that it's not, or rather I know that it isn't, but I which is why we had to go to this length to have these different types of programs.
It may well be that nobody can predict the outcome of that. You know, there's no way to estimate how much of an impact it will make.
Okay, yeah, that's all my questions for now.
Okay. I do have one. I think, Jason, you covered one of the other ones I had. So based on what I'm hearing here, it sounds like the shortfall for housing were mainly around the very affordable housing or the lower income housing. So when we rezone these spaces, and we're allowing developers to come in, does that provide any kind of requirement for those developers to make those units the lower affordable housing? Because based on what you said, if we're adding the if we're adding the density bonuses, we said they can count towards our moderate income. But was there any restrictions that state they must be those affordable housing units once we do this rezoning?
So I'm going to separate your question into two parts, okay? So with regard to the RHNA and to accommodating that particular number, what we needed to do first was to demonstrate that there were sites available with the capacity to meet that number. And by rezoning those sites, we end up, like I say, we not only demonstrate that we've met that number, but that they can also be developed at least 30 dwelling units per acre. And that's kind of the threshold that HCD is looking at. And the reason it's 30 dwelling units per acre is that when it comes to building affordable housing, you have to take into account economies of scale, right? There's, in order for these projects to kind of pencil out, they need density. And so that's why that 30 units per acre is kind of the minimum for making an affordable housing project at least pencil out. But separate to that, in terms of, I think where you might want to be going is, how do you incentivize a developer to actually build affordable housing in the city on those particular sites? So that's the other thing that the housing element does in terms of the programs that it has in place. You know, what sort of things can we do to make it easier for developers to do that? And so one of the programs that we have in place is not so much in the way of offering funding towards these affordable housing developers, but is there a way to streamline the process? Can we make it more efficient and more certain so that these developers are not, they don't have to, spend money or waste money, if you will, by having a project that takes a long time in the approval process? So there is a housing program that's in place to help kind of streamline this process and to move these projects through as efficiently as possible. And so that's one way we're trying to kind of minimize governmental constraints by making it a little bit more efficient for an affordable housing developer, or for any developer for that matter, to make their way through the approval process.
Gotcha. Well, what I was trying to get at with the question, I don't know, I feel like we've had a conversation like this before, looking at creating affordable housing. And when we're looking at our RHNA numbers, it seems like the very low income and the low income number continues to increase, even though we're getting these projects that are coming in that just don't seem to meet that particular number. So my concern is that we would rezone and allow these new projects to come in, and then we get a new RHNA assessment that still says, hey, you have not met the very low income threshold, and we'll get right back into the same space for the next time we're here. We're saying we need to make this 40 units per acre to fit very low income, and then we do the same thing. That's kind of what I'm trying to figure out, how we're stemming that.
Absolutely understood. And one thing that I should have stated kind of out of the gate, as far as the numbers that you're seeing, Commissioner, is that across every jurisdiction in California, cities were looking at RHNAs that were 3 and 4 times larger than what they had received over the past 2 planning cycles. And so Hawthorne was no different. All right, Hawthorne received a RHNA that was much higher than what it had received in the past. And so that's it shouldn't. I know it can be alarming when you see that those lower income numbers, but across the board, cities were impacted by that. And now to the other part, to answer the other part of your question is how do we stop kicking the can down the road, right? And I will say I was just kind of going through one of the programs. So one of the programs that we have in the housing plan is that we've identified certain code amendments that need to be made to the zoning code, and I'm going to just identify one of them, and one of them has to do with affordable projects and providing them with a ministerial review rather than a discretionary review if they can demonstrate that they have X amount of, or X percentage rather, of affordable units. So there are part of the housing plan, and that particular part of the housing plan is an effort to meet government code. So there are things that we're doing that are housing programs that are designed to meet government code, and other programs that are the city's undertaking on its own initiative to help, like I say, just incentivize housing development and affordable housing development. Another program would be a lot consolidation program. A lot of the opportunity sites that we've identified are projects that are 2 small parcels that would need to be combined in order to, make a project have enough land to make sense for a developer to develop on. And so we've included a lot consolidation program that kind of help incentivize that and to make these sorts of things happen. So we're taking, Hawthorne, like a number of other cities, are taking these steps to kind of ensure, or to maybe push along affordable housing and try not to kick this can down the road any further.
Thank you.
We have our other consultant, Mr. Jack Wong, has raised his hands, and I think he might have some additional comments to make on this subject.
Thank you, Greg. This is Jack. Now, in response to Commissioner's comment and question, another way to look at this is the housing element kind of prepares the table for everyone to, look at housing in the city of Hawthorne and how it could be accomplished. But how can a city require a developer to provide affordable housing, whether it be very low or moderate, in different percentages of the project? Of course, if they take part of the density bonus program, the percentage of increase is tied to the level of affordability for the bonus units. So if a developer provides units that are at the low income range, they have different incentives offered to them as far as the density increase. That's a program that is present and available to all developers. Another way cities are looking at this is, and this is starting to become more prevalent throughout California, more so in Northern Cal than Southern California, but even in, LA County area is becoming more prevalent. And it has to do with inclusionary housing ordinances. These are new tools that the cities can consider. And I believe it's part of the program for the housing element, that it's one of these tools to evaluate and consider in the future if it's appropriate. But more and more cities are considering inclusionary housing ordinances whereby developers at certain density levels are tied to specific number of units for affordable, whether it's low, very low, or moderate. So that's another way of making sure the city can achieve more affordable housing units. Cities are also looking at commercial linkage fees, that if a developer was to develop commercial projects or industrial projects for that matter, the argument is, of course, these projects have employees, and the employees, we want to have them live close to where they work. So the linkage fee is tied to the commercial and industrial projects, and the developers then pay a fee that could be put into a special kitty or entitlement fund at the city's control to then provide funds for affordable housing development in the city. So it's a way of the city having access to money that could be directed to developers to build affordable housing. And when that happens, cities usually use a development agreement between the city and the developer that says, look, you want to build 100 units of apartments. We want to have 20 of those units to be tied to affordable housing, of which 50% or 10 are going to be very low, and another 10 are going to be low income housing for 55 years. Because we know that hits your bottom line, we will provide a financial incentive. We'll provide, let's say, $750,000, just a number I throw out. But we'll provide so much money towards your cost of construction, because we know to provide affordable housing, it hurts your bottom line. You cannot, get back your profitability on those units. So there's many ways cities are looking at that. The whole question of how can we actually provide the number of units that we want to provide. And so cities are looking at different ways, and these are some of the more common tools cities are using.
Thank you.
Before I move on, there's one other factor. This is an 8-year program, and if I recall, I think we have to make reports annually, and there's going to be a big period of scrutiny around year 4, so that we have time to make adjustments. If it's not working, we can add programs like inclusionary housing.
Before
Commissioner Ortiz, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, actually, most of it was answered, asked and answered with Commissioner Richard. It was towards what can we do to incentivize? Because I did notice on the chart that the very low and low seems to be lagging behind significantly. So, and Mr. Wong gave a really good explanation also about that. Maybe some of the incentivized proposals in the future, because everything really boils down to what makes financial sense for a developer to want to develop those types of units.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the biggest hindrances towards development is parking. And I know it's a big big issue here in the city of Hawthorne. But I know a lot of cities, like for example, the city of LA, who does get a lot of very low and affordable housing, they do have incentivized programs, that don't require parking in some cases.
Yeah, and
But again, that's a very delicate subject here in the city, so.
yeah, luckily the state has already kind of settled that for us, and they've told us how much parking we can allow, and it's not very much for those. And in fact, we've seen in the last application that we got that the developers offering more parking than they have to, just because they understand the sensitivity of the issue. But the last thing I want to add before we turn it back to Perry to keep the momentum here. The incentives that we offer can also be offered on a sliding scale, so that if we want to incentivize the low and the very low income, we can just make the incentives better down there than they are for moderate income. That's something we're going to be exploring.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Perry, go ahead.
I wasn't going to ask that question, but that was the next question I wanted to ask, and I appreciate you for answering it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great, thanks everyone. And Jack, thank you for that explanation. So I'm just going to share my screen again and close out the presentation with housing, or the safety element and environmental justice element. So if you can. All right, so can everyone see this part of the presentation? I hope. Yes, okay.
Yes.
So, as I mentioned, the other two components of this overall project was an update to the safety elements and the preparation of a new environmental justice element. So just a little bit of background first on both. The city essentially, we began updating the safety element and the environmental justice element. It lagged a little bit from when we started with the housing elements, but of course during this project period, both these elements, the safety element, as I'm sure you're aware, is already part of the city's general plan. The environmental justice element will become part of the city's general plan, and they provide a 10 to 20 year vision for safety and for environmental justice in the cities. And then both of these documents were available for review on the city's website, along with the housing element during the period that we were putting this together. First, with a quick safety element overview. As I mentioned, safety element is one of the 8 mandated elements of the state mandated elements of the general plan. Hawthorne safety element was prepared in 1989, so it's a little dated. And since then, the state has adopted several new laws, which required us to sort of update the safety element. And the safety element is of course being prepared in accordance with all these new relevant regulations. The safety element is broken down into different components, or really different types of hazards, from emergency operations to flood hazards and climate and resiliency planning. In the case of the update to the city's safety element, it was very targeted. This was not a large overhaul of the safety element. We targeted very specific things, and in this case, they were related to emergency operations and fire prevention and a climate change and resiliency planning. So the proposed updates to the safety elements include, well, what we did first of all is that we kept all the current goals and policies and programs. They were all maintained in the safety element. We added references to city plans and county programs. There are new policies that are related to emergency preparedness, new policies related to fire hazards, and new policies related to climate change and resiliency. And there's new language that's been added to related to evacuation routes. We actually did some other changes to the safety element, just updated the formatting and provided some new diagrams. but otherwise it remained largely the same, save for those three topical areas. Environmental justice is something that I wanted to get a little deeper on. And before I start to read you these textbook definitions of what environmental justice, what it is, I want to just kind of start by saying that, in essence, what environmental justice entails, it's this idea that everyone is entitled to live in a place that's free from environmental hazards, and that's and they have an opportunity to live comfortably in that environment. But what Senate Bill 1000 mandates is that cities with disadvantaged communities need to adopt an environmental justice element. And how we define a disadvantaged community is that they're low-income areas that are disproportionately affected by pollution and other hazards. And Assembly Bill 1550 says that low-income communities located within a half mile of disadvantaged communities are also considered an environmental justice community. So the first thing that we needed to do was identify areas in the city that might be categorized or classified as a disadvantaged community. And the state offers a couple of tools to do that. One is the Cal EnviroScreen mapping tool, and the other is the California Air Resources mapping tool. And what we determined is by using these tools with all the variables that are inside these mapping tools, that 19 out of the 21 census tracts in Hawthorne are considered disadvantaged communities. And in fact, the only two tracts that are not considered disadvantaged communities are the two that are in the southwest corner of the city. So what we do with the environmental justice element then is that we're trying to level the playing field, if you will. So for all those disadvantaged communities that had been historically adversely affected, we want to make sure that the focus is on these areas. And we look to do things such as minimize pollution exposure and improve air quality. We want to provide better access to public facilities, provide better access to healthy food, make sure that there's safe and sanitary homes in those areas, make sure that there's opportunities for physical activity, and make sure that the people that are living in those areas have an opportunity to engage the city, to be part of civic engagement. So with this, in the preparation of the environmental justice element, what we did, we looked at existing policies that were in the general plan that might be related to environmental justice, and we incorporated those policies within the new environmental justice element. At the beginning of this process, we prepared an environmental justice white paper that was reviewed by the cities and some focus group members. It identified those disadvantaged communities, proposed some goals and policies. We conducted public outreach, and what we did with the public outreach in particular is that we did a focus group meeting. It was a meeting that was, I think, 90 minutes, if I recall, and it had about, I think we invited 8 and we had 6 attend, and we were able to really get into a detailed conversation about environmental justice issues in the city. And finally, we added new policies to reflect the findings and public input, and ultimately prepared the new environmental justice element. And as I said, we had held that focus group meeting in October. We also had an online survey that was related to environmental justice, and ultimately incorporated all that feedback into the new environmental justice element. And this holds true for not just the environmental justice element, but also the safety elements and the housing elements. From here, the next step, of course, is the Planning Commission adopts these elements tonight. We'll be going to the City Council next. I think that Greg would be better suited to answer when that date and time will be. But now I think I'll just take any questions that you might have as they relate to the safety element or environmental justice element, or if there's anything burning from the housing element discussion that we just had.
I had a question about the environmental justice element.
Sure.
Particularly, I was looking at the map. I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more explanation about the Cal Enviro screen. I know it shows the varying color slide, but it's not really telling us exactly what it is that it's looking at that point. So you think you could add a little bit more clarity in that point?
Sure. I'm going to share my screen again, just so I can bring that map up again. Okay. Sorry, I didn't. There we go. Okay. So the Cal Enviro screen mapping tool, when you use this application and you select one of these census tracts, for example, there are a number of variables that the Cal Enviro screen takes into account. It takes into account proximity to known areas where there's pollution. It takes into account proximity to public facilities. It takes into account the level of income within that census tract. And so as I mentioned, there's a number of variables that are taken into account, and these variables end up getting weighted and they generate these numbers, right? And so in this case, the larger the number that is produced, or the larger the percentile on the Cal Enviro screen on the map, means that the more disadvantaged, if you will, or the more of the worse off that census tract is, for lack of a better word. So in the case of this map, you can see that areas that are around the airport, for example, and around the 105 freeway, these are areas that are more impacted by pollution, for example. And as you can imagine, housing that's adjacent to the freeway would be more impacted by air quality. Properties that are adjacent to the airport, residences adjacent to the airport would be more impacted. And so, I think you can start to tell that this is sort of the industrial area of the city, and that's where some of these higher scores, higher translating into, worse, if you will. You can see that you can, if you know the city, then you'll know it's understandable why it is a home that's adjacent to the airport might be more impacted than a house that's in Holly Glen, right? Now there's the white paper that's included as part of the environmental justice element. It's included almost as an appendix. So if you were to go to the environmental justice elements, go to the back of the document, and you're going to see the white paper. And the white paper will get into detail as to what all those little variables in the Cal Enviro screen tool, what they mean. So does that help a little bit, Commissioner?
Yeah. And then question, just since we're looking at this, when we're selecting sites for where particular housing would go, do we cross-reference that with this map to determine whether or not we're putting things in where we're putting them to make sure that they fit in a space that's not already disadvantaged? Or
yeah. So there's I'm going to stop sharing this for a second. So in chapter 6 of the housing element, the part that's on affirmatively furthering fair housing, that is one map that we take into consideration, that Cal Enviro screen map. And And you'll see that there is an overlay. So it shows, it identifies the sites that are part of these housing opportunity sites, and it overlays them on the Cal Enviroscreen, or the Cal Enviroscreen mapping tool. And so that is something that's taken into consideration. We've considered that, and we've actually looked at, we did an analysis in the fair housing section that discusses that. And so, you know, the fact is that 19 of the 20 census tracts, or rather 19 of the 21 census tracts in the city are considered disadvantaged communities. So we've tried to spread these opportunity sites throughout the city. In some cases, you know, some sites, of course, will be in areas that might have better opportunities, as demonstrated in that fair housing analysis. But at least those sites are sort of spread throughout the city.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Mr. Banner, that's kind of the same direction I was thinking in terms of my question for environmental justice. The part of environmental justice is not aggravating, the situation, the housing situation more by adding or identifying opportunity sites in areas that are already of the higher density, which sometimes coincide with disadvantaged areas. A lot of the cases it does. So my question was going to be if that was brought up in meetings that were held about spreading these opportunities to areas that have very low density, such as like the Holly Glen area and adjacent areas.
It was those topics not only brought up during the focus group meeting, but also at during some of the city council study sessions, kind of ensuring that these sites are not concentrated in any one area, being cognizant of where in the city, high density was already occurring. And of course, I like to think that environmental justice and fair housing, they kind of go hand in hand, right? You start to identify when you do an assessment of environmental justice in these disadvantaged areas, and you do this assessment of fair housing, you can see that there are that things are correlated, right? And so yes, again, what we tried to do with these opportunity sites is not to concentrate them in any one area, to make sure that they were, not one area in the city was getting impacted, right? That there was that this housing development would be spread throughout the city. So yeah, we're very much aware of what your concerns are, and we tried to address those in both documents. And keep in mind too that the environmental justice element, the first part is identify where is there a problem, where does it exist, and all right, now let's put together a program that can be implemented to help alleviate that problem and help kind of, like I say, level the playing field a little bit, making sure that going forward, the city might, now that we've identified where these areas are, let's focus resources there. All right. If we're demonstrating that there's a lack of healthy food access or public facilities or other types of opportunities in those areas, then going forward, maybe the city can, like I say, focus its resources in those areas.
Yeah.
I think that Jack.
Understood, yeah. And part of that can also be, where there is a lot of density already. Part of that environmental justice could be also identifying or a goal of adding additional open space in forms of pocket parks and things like that could help.
Yes, and I know that separately, Greg and I have talked about how there is a kind of a deficiency of parks in open space areas in the city. And that gets touched on actually in your environmental justice element.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think Jack has his hand up.
Thanks, Perry. I know this is kind of, we're on new territory, as all cities in California are, with the environmental justice and furthering fair housing. We're all pioneers in this aspect because quite a few cities do not have environmental justice elements, and they're in the process of adopting their very first one. So, we're treading on new territory, and, we're all learning as we're going. But I think the environmental justice element and the furthering fair housing section of the housing element, pretty stellar writing and reporting that you've prepared, Perry. But in response to the question about, where some of the affordable housing projects are being suggested, could you talk a little bit about the medium to high resource areas? And there's a map, I believe you had shown us before, that you're trying to disperse the affordable housing into areas of greater resource availability.
There we go. Thanks, Jack. Let me do this again. I'm going to share my screen and bring something else up. Okay. Bear with me 1 second, gentlemen. Okay, this should be it. All right. Okay. Can everyone see this document that I have up right now? Final draft housing element, housing plan? Yeah. Okay, so let me just scroll down. So as I said, there's the final chapter, close to the final chapter in the housing element was this big assessment of fair housing. And Jack was right in terms of this fair housing chapter of the housing element, the new environmental justice element. This is uncharted territory. There wasn't a great template for which the city could look at. Everyone, all these jurisdictions in the SCAG region were writing this at the same time. So we're not sure. We think we came close to getting it right, but we shall see. And as Greg mentioned, there'll be opportunities over the planning period to sort of review where we are with this project. But I want to bring up the map that Jack is referring to. And if you had a chance to look through the housing element, you would have seen that there's probably about 30 maps in this particular chapter, but I'm just going to go to the one that agglomerates opportunities. Okay, I think this is it. Well, here, let me show you this chart here, first of all. So these are all the census tracts in the city. And for the most part, when we looked at kind of the overall opportunity scores in the city, most of the census tracts in the city were categorized as moderate resource. There were some high resources, a couple low resource areas, and one area that's high segregation and poverty. But for the most part, the city was considered moderate resource to moderate, rapidly changing to high resource. So the city was in a fairly good spot as far as that's concerned. So this is the overall. It's a little grainy because I have it zoomed in. So let me zoom out a little bit. So this is the opportunities map. And this is overall opportunities. It took into account economic, education, and environmental scores. And there's kind of a general pattern that you might start to see, right? Is that opportunities in Hawthorne increase from east to west. So this yellow section of the city, again, it has to do with the airports in here, and there's an industrial area in the city. This is considered a low resource area. And then as you move to the west, as I said, opportunities increase, and then these blue areas are the high resource areas. And then in the middle of the city, there's a lot of moderate resource areas. So this gives you some sense of how opportunities are allocated throughout the city. And so then you can also start to see that these dots represent the opportunity sites in the city. Purple being moderate and above moderate income sites. Green being sites that can accommodate the lower income, kind of lower income units. And so we haven't identified a lot of sites in this low resource area. Okay, there are a couple, because like I mentioned, we had to spread them out, and not only spread them out, but try to find them. But the sites, you know, those sites that can accommodate the lower income units are, you know, you can see that they're spread out a bit in the city. You know, a lot of them, of course, in or around Hawthorne Boulevard and towards the north end of the city. But then there's the sites that are here that are kind of down in this section that would be rezoned from M1 to R3. There is there's a number of them that would be right here along Rosecrans. But this, like I say, this gives you a sense of how these opportunity sites are distributed throughout the city. Do you have any kind of a follow-up question, Commissioner Ortiz?
No, it is very helpful, to identify the pattern, although it does lean towards the east side of the city.
And so, I want to clarify something too. When we looked, you know, as I mentioned, Hawthorne it's not rich in vacant land, right? We're not going into land that has been undeveloped. We had to look for sites, and there's not a lot of vacant sites for that matter. So what we had to look at were sites that were considered underutilized. And I know that you may have identified, I think this is Holly Glen, correct? I know I might get the Hollies confused. I know that there's...
That's correct.
Yeah. The thing with the Holly Glen neighborhood is that when we look at sites, Holly Glen might not be dense in the sense that there's multifamily uses, but all the parcels that are in Holly Glen, for example, are developed. And if we wanted to redevelop any of those sites to accommodate multifamily housing, it would mean that we would have to tear down existing housing and then rebuild. And so that becomes complicating, right? We would need to ensure that that there's replacement housing, that those people are, you know, relocated, but also those sites are small, right? In order to have an affordable housing project, you need a site that is at least half an acre, preferably an acre in size, to do an affordable housing project that will pencil out. And so, if you recall, I showed that there were criteria that we used in selecting the opportunity sites, and one of those criteria were size. Another criteria was ownership pattern. You know, if we needed to assemble land, do we at least have similar ownership of adjacent parcels? So there were a lot of factors that came into play when we were choosing these properties.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Banner. Yeah, it's quite a quite a dilemma, yeah, and I completely understand what you're saying about the less dense areas. Yeah, there's not very many opportunities, like you said, you know, and there's really not much commercial in those areas also that you can, you know, even consider changing zoning. So yeah, it's challenging to say the
Yeah.
least.
And there's, and as I mentioned, when HCD is reviewing our sites inventory, and they've already taken a very, we know this from other jurisdictions, where they're looking at these sites on an individual basis, and they want justification as to, you know, how reasonable is it that this site will get redeveloped over the course of the planning period. And so that's why a site that's, you know, might be largely a parking lot, for example, would be considered a better opportunity site than something that's, you know, developed at 90% capacity on the site. So, you know, and that's why we didn't do a kind of a blanket laying down of all the sites along Hawthorne Boulevard, for example, saying that all these sites could be used for mixed use development. We had to justify those, you know, one by one in this housing element.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a few questions. I noticed in the HCD response letter, they had mentioned that there's a deadline for to submit a complete housing element within 120 days. It sounds like it's saying from October 15th, 2021.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would have been January 13th of this year. And then it's saying if we don't comply, that we have to. It sounds like it's saying that we would have to do the rezoning for the areas that we're proposing.
Yep.
Am I reading that right?
Yeah. Within 1 year of going back to last October.
Okay.
I want to point something out. That's impossible. And the situation that letter left us in was also impossible. And we were not able to do, as Perry explained at the beginning of his presentation, to do what we could do. We had to go back and find additional inventory, which is where those sites on Rosecrans and Crenshaw came in. But I want to share my screen for a second here. I want to show you something. This is actually, let me refresh it before I share. Let me see if they've updated it yet. No, this is last week's data. But let me see if I can share this. This is the one I want. Okay, hopefully, are you seeing the website where it says Housing Element Compliance Report?
Yes.
You are? Good. All right, I'm gonna pull down the SCAG region. And I'm gonna pull down 6 site pull. This is the latest data on, and I'm sorry, it's going to be very tiny, I'm sure. Let me see if I can blow it up a little bit. This is the latest data from SCAG on the status of housing elements our latest data from HCD on the status of housing elements. I want to point out that there are 197 jurisdictions in the SCAG region. All of them have their housing elements due on the same schedule. As of last week, 2 of them have an approved and adopted and compliant housing element. 13 have not even submitted their first draft yet. And 182 jurisdictions in 5 counties are in the same situation we're in. So the point of this is, there's a long history of why this is like this, and I've explained it a little bit in the staff report, but we were in an impossible situation. And as a result, let's see if I can stop sharing. I'm not sure how to stop sharing. As a result, We are out of compliance already. We're going to be out of compliance until we get our housing element approved, adopted by the city council, and then certified by HCD, which will take anywhere from 60 to 90 days probably, because they're just basically overwhelmed right now. And then when we miss the deadline next October, this coming October, we'll be out of compliance again. There's not much we can do about it. We're hoping that the state legislature will step in and realize that with this many, this is a 99% failure rate. That's a systemic problem. That's not 99% of cities screwing around and messing up. That's a systemic problem. So we've already started the process of selecting a consultant to start our rezoning. So we're already going, and we're still never, there's no realistic hope that we're going to get it done by October. With RHNA numbers as large as this, cities are looking at massive rezonings. You can't even do that without an EIR, and you can't do an EIR in the few months that are left. So it's impossible. So yes, they have to put that language in there, and they will probably send us a nasty letter or maybe offer some technical assistance or something, but it won't do any good. We'll just plug along and we'll get it done as fast as we can.
Mr. McLean, just out of curiosity, which are the 2 Boy Scout cities that did make the deadline?
Good question. One is, let me see if I can isolate them here. I know one is Wildemar, which I'd never heard of, but it's a little town with a lot of marijuana dispensaries out in Riverside County. Very conservative city though, but that's just how they make their money. And the other is Ventura County. Those are the 2. Now, mind you, this data is a week old, so the deadline came and went during that week, and there may be 50 other jurisdictions that have managed to squeak their stuff through. I don't know, but even if there were 50, that's still 1/3 compliance, and I don't think there were 50. Okay.
And then I had a few more questions. As far as with the outreach, did we receive a lot of feedback from the community on the different elements?
You want to take that, Perry?
Sure. I would say that both the virtual workshop that we had and the community open house that we had they were lightly attended, but we actually end up getting great inputs, in particular at the virtual workshop. As far as we did get feedback on the housing survey. We wish the numbers were larger, but we did get some feedback. And then as far as written responses that may have come in, there were none that I'm aware of. But all in all, I don't think that it was surprisingly low. We did get like I say, some input. We always wish there could have been more, but we did have some people participate.
Okay. And then I was looking in the environmental justice element, and I know it's pretty much a fairly new element. I was looking in the responsibilities section, and I did see that Hawthorne PD had like little to no responsibilities in that section. I was trying to see if we can explore, maybe adding more responsibilities, to the Hawthorne PD, especially dealing with this, new element, especially when you think about justice in the community. And since we have our own, police department, we would want to, make sure that, they're a part of the community as well, and that the community, feels safe and trust in our police department. So I'm not sure if that would be like a proposal to city council for them to look into that, or
I think that's a very good suggestion, but I think the best time to deal with that will be during the implementation of these programs. We can certainly get as many different city departments and stakeholders throughout the community involved in these things. It would be a good thing. and the police department will play a very important role. So I would consider that an oversight, and we will take care of it during the implementation.
Commissioner, I think that you're referring maybe to the matrix that's at the end of the
Yeah.
environmental justice, where it describes the implementing departments. Yeah.
Oh, is that's different?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
I'm
think
sorry.
is that what you're referring to, Commissioner?
Yeah. Mhm.
Oh, I'm
So-
sorry. Yeah.
so-
Go ahead,
so-
Terry.
So Greg, I would say this is that, what we tried to do there was identify the department best suited to implement some of these programs. And of course, in many cases, there are multiple departments that could implement some of those programs.
Think
So
of this as
Greg,
the
that might,
lead. Yeah, this is the lead department that's identified.
Yeah.
A lot of these are going to be all city departments involved. This will be the leadership department. So I'm sorry, Perry, I misunderstood the question, I think.
no. And I mean, I think that could be as much, Greg, as a re-review of that matrix. And it's simply a matter really of checking the box if we think that one department might be better suited to take the lead on that project than another.
Well, yeah, maybe we can do that right after this.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Point well taken.
Okay, I'm sorry that I misunderstood your question, Commissioner.
Yeah, Greg, I think you're right on the right path. It was just where in the document it got identified.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
And then I guess maybe dealing with more of like the Hawthorne PD, just having more community engagement and measures to reduce police brutality, and let's see, maybe training for de-escalation, things like that.
Yeah, and I agree with Commissioner Carvajal and Greg. I think I'm assuming based on your prior response that's can be part of the implementation process as well, and getting,
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that part of the intention of this is to keep open dialogue, and I mean, it's not like this is good, done, set. We're going to make these programs and they're going to be static for 8 years. This should be an ongoing feedback kind of situation. So I got the message there, so we're good. Okay, should we move on?
That's it for me for the presentation, Greg.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Commissioner Ortiz, if there's no more questions from the commission, then I guess it's time to see if there's anyone from the public. We don't have anyone logged in right now from the public, but if there is anyone from the public that's watching and wants to join us, this is your chance to do it. And we can talk amongst ourselves until that happens, and then you're muted, Commissioner.
We'll give them a few minutes then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
4 minutes.
Meanwhile, we can take any additional questions.
For adding inclusionary housing, how would that work?
That I'm not sure what you mean by how would it work.
Like as far as adding it to, I'm not sure if that would be to the zoning code, or would it be to the actual element, or?
No, it'd be to the zoning code.
Okay.
Yeah, we would do it just an ordinance. I've never worked with one before, but I'm sure I can find 100 examples, and we can go from there.
Okay.
Okay, I see nobody joining us, and nobody appears to be trying. So we can close the public hearing when you're ready. I have no additional documents or anything regarding this topic.
Okay, so we'll close the public hearing, and Is there any final comments from fellow commissioners? I assuming not.
And then so making our recommendation to city council, could we ask them to, maybe approve it with looking into future plans of inclusionary housing and adding more, responsibilities for, PD in the community as far as the housing element and the
we can, you can make the motion that to have those added to the resolution, and we will take care of that. If that's the motion you make, then that will be and it is voted on, then that will be the motion.
Okay, so there's a motion with additional recommendations by Commissioner Caraveo. Now, yes, second. Can we call for a vote now?
Okay, Commissioner Caraveo?
Yes.
Commissioner Richard?
Yes.
And Commissioner Ortiz?
Yes.
Okay, so this resolution with additional add-ons will be or was approved unanimously 3-0 and will be and is approved. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. Have a great night.
Thank you. Good night. Okay, moving on to the next item, new public hearings. There are no items. We'll now recess the Planning Commission and call back to order the Airport Zoning Commission. Airport Zoning Commission consent calendar, there are no items. Airport Zoning Commission new continued public hearings, there are no items. We'll call back to order the Planning Commission concurrently with the Airport Zoning Commission. Non-public hearing items, there are no items there. And let's see, we move on to administrative items. There are no items as well. Items to be placed on the future agendas.
I'm sorry, I don't have the list with me. I usually have staff take care of that, and none of them are with me today.
Okay. If you don't mind, maybe I'm not sure if it's allowed, but if you can send us an email with those items.
Yeah, no, that's allowed. Absolutely. I will say though that we did receive an important application. It's in the very early stage, but it's for a new development at the RFK Hospital for residential development. And it was a very timely application because we were able to include that in the final draft of the housing element, which helped to push our numbers for the buffer quite a bit. So we have to enter into a density bonus agreement with the applicants, and we have to which is effectively a development agreement. So we'll be discussing the number of units with them because they were asking for 600, which is a lot, but with the density bonus, that could push it a lot higher. So we'll try to find a number that works for both sides, but we're looking to get a significant number of affordable units in that project. And whenever we have a big ask, there will be a big ask in return. So there's going to be a long period of negotiations. Hopefully not too long, because it would be nice to see something done there, because that hospital has been a blight for a long time.
Yeah, that's really good news.
Yeah, so that's a brand new application, and hopefully, before too much longer, we'll see this come together. That is the big news I wanted to share with you.
Okay, thank you.
With that, just a question on that. With that being in the very, very early stages of it, I'm sure details and whatnot are still kind of coming together. I know you're still looking at the exact numbers, but is it just going to be purely residential, or is it some mixed use type deal, or how's that shaping up? So
it's residential. I think that mixed use would be very questionable there. And this area is actually in its own specific plan. And the specific plan that's there now is a purely residential specific plan, but it's also a not very high density. So they will be, it doesn't really matter as far as the municipal code here goes. They will either be replacing that specific plan with a new one or modifying it so extensively that it's effectively a new one. It's the same application process, but it will remain a specific plan. So they'll have a lot of freedom to do what they want, provided that it is approved by the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Okay. With that, we'll move to commissioner reports. Any report?
I just want to thank staff, Greg and Perry, for putting together that presentation and the reports for us. Definitely put together a lot of information, a lot of research, and we definitely appreciate that for us and the community. Also, happy Black History Month, and also happy Valentine's Day to everyone.
I'll add, thank everyone who came out. Again, also thank you to staff. I know that document looked like it was pretty expensive, a lot of work it took to put that together. We appreciate it. I do want to ask just a note that if that report can be made available to the public, if we can post it online so they can have access to it and to all the findings. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think everything was posted online already. And I believe it's, if you follow the links through the planning department page, you should be able to find it, or there's probably many other ways to get to it. Yes. Thank you for those though, from both of you. And I think we should also thank Commissioner Ortiz for stepping up and being the chairperson today.
Right. Oh, thank you, sir. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was a flashback to quite a few years ago.
I will say that I also did receive a phone call in the middle of the meeting from Chairperson Smith, and he is okay. So we were worried about him for a while there. That
is great. Thank you. And I echo the same sentiments as my fellow commissioners. Thank you, Greg, and the rest of the consultants and staff for putting this massive report together. Hopefully we can follow through on some of the items that we've identified to be added, and it becomes an even loftier goals that will ultimately be of benefit to the whole community. So with that, if there's nothing else further, I will call this meeting to adjournment at 7:48 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.